Hello and welcome to Accelerating Your Authority. This is the show to help you grow your expertise-based business through six figures and beyond. I'm your host, Alistair McDermott, and I interview leaders, consultants, and experts about their business so they can share their stories, advice, and insights for growth. And I'm very happy to say today my guest is Sam Glynn. Sam, you're very welcome to the show. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and who you serve?
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. It's great to be here. As you say, my name is Sam Glynn. My background is IT, primarily within the regulated financial services world. It's 25 years since I kind of got into this, and mainly working with the regulated firms themselves, helping them with IT and cybersecurity. But more recently, what I found is the regulated firms are asking far more detailed questions of their suppliers and their service providers, fintechs, SaaS providers, professional services people, far more detailed questions about their cybersecurity measures to make sure that they're not a risk to the regulated firm. And what I'm finding is the maturity within the service providers is lower than what the clients would have because they've been regulated for so many years. So more recently, what I'm focusing on is helping the service providers to put in an appropriate level of security so that their clients and more importantly, their prospects don't regard them as a risk and just focus on their solution.
Can you tell me a little bit more about those companies who are your clients, these service providers? So who are they and what's the challenge that they're facing with this?
They can be a mix. I mean, I kind of generally say it's anyone that sells a service. So it's a B2B service into a regulated firm. When I say regulated, it's financial services, but it could easily be pharma as well, or somewhere like that. The challenges that they would face, I suppose, their focus is on serving their clients, or if they're a fintech or a SaaS provider, their focus is on building a good product, solving a problem. And what they're now being asked about is, well, that's all great. You've got a solution to our problem, but are you a risk to our business? And because of their focus on serving their clients and building good products, they haven't had the time or the money to focus on the security side of their solution or their service.
Yeah, I can imagine that that's not something that would come up for somebody, particularly for smaller providers, that they're focused on service delivery. So can you tell me a little bit more, what are the issues? Can you go into a little bit of detail, what are those types of issues that the regulated industry clients really care about that these service providers aren't doing or aren't providing?
Yeah, like I say, I suppose regulated firms have been regulated and, depending on the jurisdiction, the regulator can be very prescriptive around what is regarded as appropriate security. Within Ireland, it's been quite prescriptive since 2016. There's a regulation coming, the DORA regulation in the EU 2025, which is very prescriptive. So regulated firms have the capacity and the maturity to look at regulations and apply those requirements internally. And they've been doing a pretty good job at that. So part of that is then looking down through their value chain or their supply chain and asking the partners that they have, what are you doing? And when they ask non-regulated firms, then those firms don't have the maturity. They don't have the history of having to comply with regulations because they're not regulated. So their struggle really is they have a lot of people that can do sales. They have a lot of people that can solve problems, but they don't necessarily have a lot of people that can just look at security and risk because cybersecurity is a risk. So the whole maturity around risk management and specifically cybersecurity risk management isn't there. And cybersecurity is hot. There's quite a shortage of talent and resources and experience there. So, and these providers, they're not as big as a global bank. They don't have the resources to just go and spend what they need to spend. So they need to do it in a pragmatic way that doesn't blow the budget. But what's happening for them is they're receiving security questionnaires. That's the real kind of indicator that there's a challenge. They get a 300 question questionnaire from a regulated client or from a hot prospect, and they're looking at the questionnaire going, where do I start?
And so where do they start? Where would you advise somebody in that scenario? They've just got this huge questionnaire. What do you do?
I think the challenge is for a lot of these questionnaires, it's a one size fits all. So the questionnaire that is sent to a Microsoft is the same questionnaire that is sent to a 10-person, service provider that's doing business consulting, or that, a 10-person fintech or startup. So the problem they have is they look at 300 questions and go, my God, I'm never going to be able to deal with this. The way to look at it is to say, well, accept that there are some questions you're going to have to be able to give good answers to, but there's potentially some questions that don't apply to you. So it's understanding where can you, well, I wouldn't call it pick the fight, but where can you challenge back to say, this is far beyond what, you would really need from us because of the nature of the things we do for you or the nature of the data that we've access to. But it's, if you don't have the expertise and the experience of having gone through these, then you don't know, are you in any kind of position to challenge back? And depending on who you're challenging back to, they could just be, a computer says no. So it doesn't matter whether you've got a logical argument. They might just say, well, I work here in this vendor management team or this due diligence team. If you don't say yes to this question, you don't come in the door. So there's a real challenge there. Where to begin really is to, for a lot of these companies, they've started out small. They've focused on their minimum viable product or their minimum viable service. And to a degree, they have to do the same here with security. What is the minimum viable security? What's the minimum that they should have in place? And at least to make sure that they've got that strong foundation, that secure foundation. And then look at the delta between that and the additional things that the client is asking about and decide, are there things here that we really should do? How can we do them? How long will they take? And present that story back to the client, because, they might say, look, fair enough. We appreciate your honesty. We'll give you 6 months to get there. We'll give you 12 months to get there. And then look at some questions and go, look, there's no way in the world we're ever going to do this. The contract isn't worth this big step. And that's where you might decide, well, we'll go back and have a discussion with the client about whether this really is a requirement for us.
Yeah, so it's kind of what I'm hearing from you there is it's kind of like triaging the questionnaire and the problem and seeing, okay, what's a deal breaker and what's not, what's urgent. And it sounds like there's a bit of nuance there as well around sometimes they're negotiable, sometimes they're non-negotiable.
Absolutely. And the way the questionnaires are written, I mean, a lot of it is automated out of the supplier management platforms or frameworks or whatever. So the questions can be very dry, and it may hide the fact that the client is actually open to negotiation around some of these things. And in some cases, the client or the prospect could be sending you the questionnaire, and in a way, they don't even know what the questions are asking because they got it from somebody else, or they got it from another team in the global organization. And if you answer the questions, whether they're good answers or bad answers, your prospect might not even know what good looks like. So, they might well be open to a more nuanced conversation to deal with that grey. But when you get a 300 question questionnaire, it's an elephant. And it's trying to figure out, well, how do we slice up the elephant? Can we put the bucket into, we have to eat it now, put this slice into the bucket, which is we have to do it at some point, we'll have to eat that slice, and then another bucket, which is let's go back and say we're not eating this part of the elephant, Yeah.
And, okay, so it sounds like the key message there is don't panic if you get a huge questionnaire, like this is still possible.
It is, yeah. I mean, it does depend on the particular client and just how much leverage you have or how much power there is within the client firm. So, you obviously have a solution to a problem that somebody in that firm wants you to solve. The question is then, well, what power have they got to talk to their colleagues about their 300 questions? Are there kind of baselines that have to be met? And is there something else where it's like, well, sometime in the future or never is okay? So it certainly is don't panic. I suppose focus on the value of the prospect. If this prospect is hugely valuable to you and could really bring your business to the next level, then it's worth your while, having to think about it, trying to find a logical way to do this and deal with it pragmatically.
Are there any resources that you could direct people to that could help with this?
Well, I suppose most of the questionnaires, the first question you're asked is, do you align to any particular framework or standard, or are you accredited to ISO 27001? That's the first question, which tends to be the one that really makes you panic, because that's a lot of, not just doing the right things, but proving you're doing the right things. So if you want to go down that road and go, well, what are these things? You can certainly look up. There's very good guides. I see it frequently on LinkedIn or the National Cybersecurity Centres, those types of places, which will give you a guide as to, well, what does this mean? What does alignment mean? The frameworks are usually freely available. In terms of the specific questions, I think, again, it goes back to trying to look at it as steps in a ladder. So, try to figure out, well, what step are you on the ladder? What level of maturity are you at? And don't try to get to the top of the ladder from the start, because that's going to probably cause a lot of business disruption for you. It'll probably be a lot of cost. and it'll distract you from the job that you have, which is to generate income and sustain the business. So try to identify what the steps are. And what I would say is the first step is make sure that you've got that minimum viable security, that secure foundation that addresses the most common problems, the most common risks, the most common ways that the common attacks happen, so that at least you don't fall victim to an attack while you're trying to actually address the concerns or the expectations of your prospects.
So is there a myth or misunderstanding in this area that you'd like to help people with?
Well, I suppose, if you look at the news headlines, there's lots of talk about zero-day attacks and ways that attackers from North Korea or China or wherever are able to find their way into government agencies or into places. I think MGM Resorts is the latest one. But when you actually look at the statistics, most attacks aren't that sophisticated. So what I would say is all of the media will talk about the James Bond attacks, the very sophisticated, experienced attackers finding a way in the dead of night, when in reality most attacks are actually Jim the burglar coming around to your house and checking the front door and finding it's wide open. So it's focus on Jim the burglar, because he's the guy that's probably going to cause the attack. And while the immediate financial cost might not be significant, you end up paying a fake invoice, or one of your email accounts is breached, but luckily enough the email account isn't an important one. The reputational damage and just the perception that you're a risk could be detrimental. So focus on where is the threat likely to be coming from, and also focus on where your crown jewels are. What's the most important thing? So don't think about the media reports. Think about the statistics.
So is there something that you believe that a lot of people don't believe when it comes to cybersecurity and regulated industries?
Well, I mean, there's a bit of a dirty little secret, I suppose, is the way you'd put it, where, everyone will tell you, oh, cybersecurity is very important to us. And usually you'll see that as the first line in the apology letter from a firm that's just been breached. And the reality is, for most firms, they don't really care about cybersecurity. And most of your employees don't really care about cybersecurity. They have other important things to do. So it's not top of their agenda. And what brings cybersecurity to the top of the agenda and where things actually happen is when somebody that's important to you starts asking you difficult questions. So regulated firms will deal with this when the regulator starts asking. So you'll have the DORA regulation will be the new GDPR in 2024, because it comes in 2025 and it's very prescriptive. So regulated firms, if they haven't done it before, will take this very seriously now. And a key part of that is your third party risk. I think the service providers are starting to take cybersecurity seriously because now they're being asked difficult questions. So
what, this is now becoming regulated, things are changing. So if somebody wants to take an action, is there an action that they can take today that will actually help them to start moving towards solving this?
I would always describe the process as I say, the steps in the ladder. And I think step one is to prioritize. So it's just, work out, if you can, where your crown jewels are. What are the most important things? If you're going to suffer an attack, what's the worst attack that could happen to you? Whether it's because of the financial impact it would have right now, and it just doesn't help with your current business model or your current phase of business. Whether it's because the reputational risk, the perception that you're a risk. Find out what's the worst kind of attack. Identify that. Identify where your most important stuff is, your most important process, your most important data. And think about that attack against that most important data, and try to find the ways to secure or reduce the risk of that happening, or to reduce the impact if that was to happen. And do that over and over and over again. That's one way you could do it. So you're again dealing with that elephant. But if you don't have a priority, if you don't have a sense of what actually is most important to me and what is most fearful to me, then you're just going to go around in circles, because there's so many things that, especially if you look at cybersecurity headlines or cybersecurity products, there are so many products out there that will tell you they solve all these problems. But it's not necessarily a product thing. It's not necessarily a technology thing. It's just about what are the threats and what are the valuables, and how do you stop Jim the burglar getting to the valuables, and what are the things you can do. And don't forget staff, and as well as the technology.
Yeah, it strikes me that a lot of what you're talking about there is stuff that we as businesses should just be doing anyway. regardless of whether you're getting a 300 questionnaire from your clients or not. We really should be looking at these issues.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the same as, not to be morbid, but it's the same as we should all have a will, and we should all have, enduring power of attorney in case we lose the ability to make decisions for ourselves. I've written about this kind of stuff. We all know the things that we need to do. There's no lack of information out there, but acting is a different thing. And it is about, what's the top 3 things on your priority list? And there's always going to be something more important. That's just the nature of it. We won't publicly tell people that. But, I mean, if this really was a priority for everyone, then I wouldn't make a living, because the information is out there as to how you deal with this. I have a free guide out there to tell people how you have minimal viable security. It's not a lack of information. It's a lack of attention, and it's a lack of time. But it is actually, in terms of those common, unsophisticated, most likely attacks, it is quite simple to deal with these things effectively. So it's trying to identify, yes, it is an elephant, but some of the slices are actually quite digestible, so long as you've got a logical, sane way of going about this. If you try to eat that elephant in all one go, it's going to be, indigestion. That's all you're going to get.
I love it. Is there a question that I should have asked you that would be really useful for people to hear about this issue?
I would think it is the what frustrates me more around this. And I think for regulated firms, because I've worked a lot for regulated firms, and in most cases they rely on third parties, IT providers, IT managed service providers, to manage their IT for them. And what frustrates me is, whether it's the client's fault or whether it's the IT provider's fault, there's a view that the IT provider is doing all of this for them. And the reality is, unless it's written in a contract, it's not happening. Because why would an IT provider be doing something that they're not being paid for? So there's kind of another little dirty little secret where no one wants to ask the question because they know what the answer is. And if they ask the question, the answer will be written down, and now they'll have work to do. So sometimes that's a client issue. They don't know to ask the question, or they know they should ask the question, but they don't want the answer. Other times it might be the IT providers suggesting they're doing more than what they're doing. On the service provider side, if I'm working with a SaaS or a fintech or a business consultancy or whatever it is frustrating to me, and I can see their frustration, that they receive a 300-question questionnaire that's asking them to comply with certain security standards that I can tell you the regulated clients don't comply with themselves. So, they might say, can you prove that you align to the NIST cybersecurity framework or the CIS controls or you're ISO 27001 certified? And yet the regulated client has none of those things. So they're kind of coming in saying, do as I say, not as I do. So, there's a frustration there. You're asking what is likely to be a smaller company with fewer resources to comply with a higher baseline than you're complying with yourself. And that is frustrating. And in a way, it's a barrier to the smaller, newer technology providers or service providers, because that takes a lot of time and that takes a lot of money. Whereas it's quite comfortable place. It's a quite nice situation for bigger consultancy firms, for bigger technology providers, because they do have the money to spend on getting these certifications. Now, the value of those certifications behind the scenes is minimal, because the security might be weaker than anyone would think. But for the bigger firms, they're able to get these things. They can tick the box and say, yeah, we're all certified, which gets them through the door. And yet the smaller providers that have a better solution but don't have the resources to do all of these things can't get through the door. And that is frustrating to me. And I suppose that's why I'm trying to help firms to do what they can with the resources that they have available to them.
That's a good mission. I like that. Is there something surprising or a story that people don't know about you that you can tell us?
Well, I do have some people that I would write 3 times a week. That's kind of what it is at the minute. And one of those is a news roundup of cybersecurity stories. It's a plain English type thing. But 2 of those are more just trying to help people get their head around cybersecurity. So a lot of the time I'll write something which is the theme of what the hell has this got to do with cybersecurity. So, I will write about what Taylor Swift has got to do with cybersecurity, what a music festival has, what a toilet has, what tinfoil has, what microwave has. I just went through the list there, and that's the kind of things I've covered in the last month or 2. And I get a lot of people saying, who are you paying to come up with these ridiculously stupid ideas? Or is it ChatGPT? What are your prompts? And the reality is I'm just writing them myself. because that's what I do. It's just trying to help people realize that cybersecurity to a large extent is mindset. It's understanding that it is to a large extent simple, at least in terms of the unsophisticated attacks that you're more likely to experience. And it's not something to kind of just shy away from. There are simple things you can do to just minimize or reduce that risk, that likelihood, that impact. And I'm just trying to help people realize, just start doing this and just keep going, or start and stop. But at least you'll have done something. You'll have gone somewhere towards one of those steps.
If I was to go to a business networking event and I met somebody, how would I know if they were a good fit client for you?
If they tell you they have a frustration around converting a hot prospect, someone that has said yes, converting them into a paying client, and it's because they can't get the client to recognize that they're not a risk. So I kind of describe it as, you're courting your wife or your husband, or future wife, future husband, and you get them to say yes, and then you get to the top of the altar, and yet one of their family members stands up and says, yes, I object to this union, and it's like, where did you come out of? And it is someone in the due diligence team or in the procurement team or in the vendor management team that was not involved in that conversation. That is a big frustration, because for a lot of the service providers I'm helping, they don't have a massive pipeline. It's not like they've got 100 deals all ready to convert. Some of these deals can be make or break. They can bring them to the next level. They can bring them from serving small clients to serving enterprise clients. And it's frustrating when they suddenly hit that barrier to say, well, none of my smaller clients or prospects have asked me these questions before. I'm now getting this, once in a lifetime deal, trying to get it over the line. And they're frustrated that they can't, because they've suddenly been hit with this family member saying, you're not getting in. So that to me is, if someone is saying cybersecurity is hitting them in that way. Obviously, if someone is saying, I'm very concerned about cybersecurity, I really want to do something about that, that is also very useful. But I just find this is where people feel the pain, is when it's preventing them from growing their turnover.
Yeah, that's the trigger.
Yeah.
So, Sam, if people want to find you, where can they go to find more?
samglynn.com would be myself. That redirects into my business, which is codeinmotion.ie. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn. Sam Glynn IE. Glynn is Glynn.
Awesome. Well, Sam Glynn, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks a lot, Alistair. It was great.